The tow truck's engine roared to life at 6:47 a.m., and James Traven knew his world was about to end. He bolted upright in the back seat of his rusted Honda, heart hammering against his ribs as yellow flashing lights flooded through the fogged windows. His hands flew to the door handle locked from the outside. Through the dirty glass he saw him, the store owner, arms crossed, that sick smile spreading across his face like poison. "No, wait." James's voice cracked as metal hooks clanged against his bumper. Everything he owned was in this car. Everything. The chain tightened with a screech that sounded like his last shred of dignity being ripped away. But hey, before I tell you how this decorated war hero went from saving lives overseas to being treated like garbage in his own country, I need to know something. How are you doing today? Where are you watching this from? Drop a comment below, because this story about what happened in a small town when cruelty met compassion, it matters. And if you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, do it now, because the stories I share here, they'll restore your faith in humanity, or break your heart trying, sometimes both. Now back to James, 6 seconds away from losing everything. The hydraulics hissed. His car lifted off the ground, that car that had been his bedroom, his shelter, his last piece of protection from a world that had turned its back on him the moment he came home from war. The store owner, Richard Lannister, stepped closer, his Italian leather shoes crunching on the gravel. "Should have moved when I told you to, soldier." He spat the last word like it was garbage. James pressed his palm against the cold window, watching the parking lot, the only spot in this godforsaken town where he'd felt even remotely safe, drop away beneath him. What James didn't know was that 3 people were watching. 3 people who'd seen everything. And what they were about to do would expose a secret so shocking, it would bring this entire town to its knees. But first, you need to understand how a man who once carried wounded brothers through enemy fire ended up here, trapped in a car being towed like trash by a man who owed him everything. 3 months earlier, James Traven had pulled into this parking lot with $127 in his pocket, a Purple Heart in a box he never opened, and absolutely nowhere else to go. He'd been living in his car for 2 weeks by then, drifting from town to town, each rejection letter feeling like another bullet he couldn't dodge. The Honda's odometer had rolled past 200,000 miles somewhere in Kansas, and the check engine light had been on so long he'd stopped noticing it, just like everyone had stopped noticing him. The grocery store job posting in the window had seemed like a miracle. Now hiring all positions. He'd smoothed down his wrinkled shirt, practiced his smile in the rearview mirror, and walked in with his head high. Old habits. In the service, you never showed weakness. Never let them see you broken. Richard Lannister had looked him up and down like he was evaluating livestock. "Military, huh?" His lip curled. "Let me guess you can't hold down a real job, so you're looking for charity?" James had kept his voice steady. "Professional. I'm looking for work, sir. I'm reliable. I show up on time, and How old are you?" 47. Richard laughed. "I need people who can move, not collect a disability check on my dime. Try the VA or whatever you people do." James nodded. Thanked him anyway. Why did he always thank people who hurt him? And walked back to his car. He'd sat there for 20 minutes, staring at that job posting, before he realized it wasn't even real. The sign had been there for months, sun-faded and peeling. Richard Lannister didn't want employees. He wanted people to think his business was thriving. But James had stayed in that parking lot because it was well lit, because the bathroom around back had a broken lock he could slip through at 5 a.m. before anyone arrived. Because after 3 months of sleeping in Walmart parking lots and rest stops, he was just tired, so tired of moving. He'd made the car his home, organized his few possessions with military precision toiletries in the glove box, spare clothes folded in a duffel behind the passenger seat, a blanket that still smelled like the last place he'd called home, back when home was a word that meant something. Every morning at dawn, he'd walk 2 miles to a park with public restrooms to wash his face, brush his teeth, and try to look like someone who deserved to exist in polite society. Then he'd walk back and wait. Wait for the day labor guys who sometimes showed up looking for an extra hand. Wait for the odd jobs that paid $20 cash to clean a garage or move furniture. wait for his luck to change. It never did. But three people had been watching him closely. Sarah McKay, the waitress at Morrison's diner across the street, had noticed him first. She'd seen the way he always picked up trash in the parking lot, even though nobody asked him to. The way he'd sit on the curb with a battered paperback, never bothering anyone, never asking for anything. She'd watched him give his last protein bar to a stray dog one Tuesday morning, then skip lunch himself. She'd asked her manager about him. "That vet who parks out back, you know his story?" Her manager had shrugged. "Lannister calls him a bum, says he's bad for business." But Sarah had served enough broken men to recognize something Richard Lannister would never understand. Dignity doesn't disappear just because everything else does. Then there was Cole Bridger, the mechanic who ran the auto shop next door. He'd noticed James checking his oil every morning with the precision of someone who understood that this car wasn't just transportation, it was survival. Cole had watched him nurse that dying Honda with zip ties and prayer, refusing to let it quit because he couldn't afford for anything else in his life to fail. One afternoon, Cole had wandered over. "That transmission's gonna go soon." James had looked up, defensive, wary. "I know. I could patch it. $20 for parts. I don't have $20." Cole had studied him, the military bearings still visible under the exhaustion, the calloused hands, the eyes that had seen things Cole couldn't imagine. "You know how to organize a workshop?" James had blinked. "Yeah, then work it off. 3 hours." It was the first kindness James had received in months that didn't come with pity attached. Just a transaction, dignity wrapped in a handshake. And then there was Emma Dawson, the elementary school teacher who stopped for coffee every morning on her way to work. She'd noticed how James always stood a little straighter when children walked by, like some old instinct kicked in to protect the innocent, guard the vulnerable. She'd seen him return a lost wallet to the coffee shop, its cash untouched, when he clearly needed every penny. One morning, she'd brought him a thermos of soup. "It's extra," she'd lied. "I made too much." James had hesitated, pride and hunger warring in his expression. "Ma'am, I can't. It's going to waste otherwise. You'd actually be helping me out." He'd taken it, hands shaking slightly. "Thank you," she smiled. "Thank you for your service." Something had flickered in his eyes, pain maybe, or memory. That was a long time ago. Doesn't make it less true. These three strangers had formed an unspoken alliance, a quiet rebellion against Richard Lannister's cruelty. They'd take turns, Sarah bringing leftover pie, Cole offering small jobs, Emma leaving books and blankets in a bag by his car. Never too much, never enough to make him feel like charity, just enough to remind him that humanity still existed. But they'd also noticed something else. James Traven never talked about his past, never explained how he'd ended up here. The few times Sarah had asked, he'd changed the subject with the smoothness of someone practiced at deflection. What they didn't know was that James had saved 37 lives during his last deployment, that he dragged wounded soldiers through enemy fire while half his own body was shredded with shrapnel, that he stayed behind to cover his unit's evacuation, taking 3 bullets that should have killed him. They'd given him medals for it. Purple Heart, Bronze Star, a handshake from a general and a promise: your country will never forget your sacrifice. His country had forgotten him before his wounds even healed. The nightmares had started 6 months after he came home. Then the panic attacks. Then the VA appointments that somehow never materialized. The disability claims that got lost in bureaucratic limbo. The phone calls that went unreturned. His wife had left when the money ran out. "I didn't sign up for this," she'd said, as if his trauma was a lifestyle choice. His brother stopped returning calls. His friends from before the war had moved on, built lives he no longer fit into. So he drifted, worked when he could find it, slept where he wouldn't be moved along, survived. And somehow ended up here, in this parking lot, under the contempt of a man who'd never sacrificed anything more meaningful than a golf tee time. What James didn't know was that Richard Lannister had a brother, a younger brother named Michael who'd served one tour in Afghanistan. A brother who'd come home, graduated college, started a family, lived a normal life. A brother who'd survived his deployment because a soldier named James Traven had carried him 3 miles through enemy territory with a bullet in his own shoulder. Small world, cruel world. But Sarah, Cole, and Emma were about to make it a little less cruel. They just didn't know the store owner was watching too, and he was about to make his move. It happened on a Wednesday morning, the kind of gray October day that made everything feel like it was holding its breath. James had just finished washing up at the park, face shaved, hair combed back with water, trying to look presentable for another day of hoping someone might need an extra pair of hands. He was walking back to his car when he saw them. Sarah, Cole, and Emma standing together by Morrison's diner, heads bent in conversation. They looked up as he approached. Something in their expressions made him slow down. "Morning," he said carefully, that old military caution kicking in. When people gathered to talk about you, it was rarely good news. Sarah stepped forward, her waitress apron still dusted with flour from the morning biscuits. "We've been talking," she said, "the three of us, about you." James's defenses slammed into place. "Look, if this is about the parking, it's not about the parking." Cole cut him off, wiping grease from his hands with a red rag. "It's about the fact that you're living in your car behind a grocery store, and none of us can pretend we don't see it anymore." Emma pulled out her phone. "We want to help. We've been researching veteran housing programs, job placement services. I don't need charity." The words came out harder than James intended, old pride rising like a wall. "I'm fine." "You're not fine." Sarah's voice was gentle but firm, and there's no shame in accepting help from people who care. The words hit him like a sucker punch. When was the last time anyone had cared? When was the last time he mattered to someone beyond being an inconvenience to move along? His throat tightened. "Why?" The word came out barely above a whisper. "Why do you care?" "Because we see you," Emma said simply. "And what we see is someone who deserves better than sleeping in a car while the rest of us pretend homeless veterans are someone else's problem." Something cracked in James's chest, something that had been frozen solid for months. He looked down, blinking hard, refusing to let them see him break. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Cole said. "Let us help. We're not asking you to tell us your whole story. We're just asking you to let us try." And for the first time in longer than he could remember, James felt something that almost resembled hope. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay." But across the parking lot, Richard Lannister was watching through his office window, and he was furious. The next morning, James woke to find a bag hanging on his car door handle. Inside, a new jacket, still tagged, warm socks, a gift card to the diner with a note in Sarah's handwriting. "Breakfast is on us, no arguments." He sat in his car holding that gift card, and for the first time in months, he cried. Not from despair, from something far more dangerous, hope. He walked into Morrison's diner at 7 a.m., a gift card clutched in his hand like a golden ticket. Sarah was behind the counter, and her face lit up when she saw him. "Coffee?" she asked. "Please." She poured him a cup, steam rising like a blessing. "The special today is biscuits and gravy. Sounds good?" It sounded like heaven. He was halfway through his breakfast. Real food, hot food, food he didn't have to feel guilty about eating when the door chimed and Richard Lannister walked in. The diner went quiet. Richard's eyes landed on James immediately, then flicked to Sarah behind the counter. His expression curdled. "Really, Sarah? You're feeding the vagrant now?" Every head in the diner turned. James set down his fork slowly, carefully. "Stay calm. Don't engage. Don't give him the satisfaction." But Sarah wasn't backing down. "I'm feeding a customer, Richard. Is that a problem?" "It is when he's using stolen money." Richard's voice carried across the diner, loud and accusatory. "I had $20 go missing from my register yesterday. Funny timing, don't you think?" James felt the blood drain from his face. "I didn't." "Sure you didn't." Richard stepped closer, his cologne expensive and suffocating. "You people are all the same. You take, never contribute, never earn anything honestly. That's enough." Cole's voice came from a booth in the corner where he'd been having his morning coffee. He stood up, all 6 feet of him, grease still under his fingernails from an early job. "You can't just accuse someone without proof." "The proof is that he's homeless," Richard sneered. "What else do I need?" Emma was there too, at a table by the window, her teacher's bag packed for school. She stood up slowly, her voice cold and precise. "Actually, Richard, what you need is evidence and a conscience. But I'm guessing both are in short supply." The diner was watching now, phones out, a few people recording. Small towns loved drama, and this was the best show they'd had in months. Richard's face flushed red. He pointed at James. "I want you gone. Off my property. If I see that piece of junk car in my lot again, I'm calling the police. And if you think these 3 bleeding hearts are going to save you, think again. This town doesn't want you here." He turned and walked out, the door slamming behind him like a judge's gavel. The diner stayed silent for 3 long seconds. Then Sarah refilled James's coffee. "For the record," she said loud enough for everyone to hear, "James has been nothing but respectful since he's been here, and Richard Lannister is a liar." A few people nodded. An older man in a veteran's cap raised his coffee mug in solidarity, but others looked away, uncomfortable, unwilling to choose sides. James pushed his plate away, appetite gone. "I should go." "No." Emma's hand landed on his shoulder. "You should finish your breakfast. We're not letting him win." But James could feel the shift in the air, the way the town was already choosing sides. And he knew from experience that kindness was no match for power when power wanted you gone. What none of them knew was that Richard Lannister had already made a call to Morton's towing service, to have James's car impounded the moment he left it unattended. And what Richard Lannister didn't know was that his brother Michael was about to come home for a visit. After 8 years of avoiding his hometown, avoiding the memories, avoiding the guilt of surviving when so many others hadn't, Michael Lannister was coming home, and he was about to see a face he thought he'd never see again, the face of the man who'd saved his life. That afternoon, Cole offered James a job. It's not much. Cleaning the shop, organizing parts, maybe some basic maintenance if you're up for it. $15 an hour, cash. James stared at him. "You're serious?" "Dead serious. I've been meaning to hire someone anyway. Might as well be someone I trust." Trust. Another word James had forgotten the meaning of. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll start Monday." James shook his hand, grip firm, military tight. Monday. For the first time in months, James went to sleep that night with a plan, a future. A reason to wake up that wasn't just surviving another day. But at 6:47 a.m. the next morning, the tow truck arrived, and Richard Lannister stood watching with that sick smile as James's entire world was lifted off the ground and hauled away. Sarah saw it from the diner. Cole saw it from his shop. Emma saw it from her car on the way to school. And all 3 of them made the same decision at that moment. This ends now. They didn't know they were about to start a war. But they were about to discover that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can trigger an avalanche. And Richard Lannister was standing right in its path. The tow yard wanted $485 to release James's car. He had $73. Sarah started a coffee can collection at the diner. By noon, it held $127 and a note that said, "For the vet who deserves better." By closing time, $340. Cole spread the word at his shop. That veteran Richard had towed. He saved lives overseas. Now he can't even keep his car. 5 customers donated on the spot. Emma posted on the town's Facebook group, "A decorated veteran is being harassed by a local business owner. This is how we treat our heroes?" The post went viral in 3 hours. 487 shares. The comment section became a battlefield. "Lannister's always been a bully. Maybe the vet should get a job instead of begging. I served with guys like him. They deserve better." Homeless people are a choice. The town was splitting down the middle. Richard saw the post and called his lawyer. Then he called the police, claiming James had been trespassing. "I want him arrested if he comes near my property again." But that same afternoon, Michael Lannister's truck pulled into town for his first visit in 8 years. He drove past the grocery store, past the diner, past the auto shop, and that's when he saw the photo Emma had posted. The veteran's face in the image, weathered and exhausted. Michael's hands started shaking, so badly he had to pull over. He knew that face. He'd seen it in his nightmares for 15 years. The face of the soldier who'd carried him through hell, who'd taken bullets meant for him, who'd refused to leave him behind when everyone else said he was already gone. James Traven. Alive. Here. Homeless. Michael sat in his truck, staring at that photo, and felt something inside him shatter. His brother had done this. His own brother had destroyed the man who'd saved his life. And Michael Lannister was about to make sure everyone knew it. Michael Lannister walked into his brother's grocery store at 4:37 p.m., and Richard looked up from his register with surprise that quickly shifted to annoyance. "Michael, what are you doing here? I thought you weren't coming until Thanksgiving." "We need to talk." Michael's voice was flat, controlled, the voice of a man barely holding himself together. "Now." Richard glanced at his cashier. "Take your break, Denise." Once she was gone, he crossed his arms. "What's this about?" Michael pulled out his phone, showed him Emma's post. "This veteran you had his car towed, James Traven." Richard's jaw tightened. "That bum's got the whole town feeling sorry for him. It's pathetic." "That bum," Michael said, his voice dropping to something dangerous, "is the reason I'm alive." The color drained from Richard's face. "What, Kandahar Province, 2010, July 14th. Michael's hands were shaking now, 15 years of buried trauma rising to the surface. "Our convoy hit an IED. I was trapped in a burning Humvee with a piece of shrapnel in my leg and half my unit dead around me. Everyone was retreating. Everyone except one soldier who came back." Richard stared at him, comprehension dawning like a slow-motion car crash. "He pulled me out while the vehicle was on fire, carried me 3 miles through enemy territory with a bullet in his shoulder, refused to leave me even when his sergeant ordered him to fall back. He saved my life, Richard. And you," Michael's voice cracked. "You called him a parasite. You had his car towed like he was garbage." The silence in that store was deafening. Richard's mouth opened. "I didn't know." "You didn't care to know." Michael slammed his hand on the counter. "You saw a homeless veteran and decided he was worthless. You never asked his name, never asked his story. You just decided he didn't deserve basic human decency." "Michael, do you know what he said to me that day? When I asked him why he came back for me?" Michael's eyes were wet now, years of survivor's guilt pouring out. He said, "Because you matter, because every life matters, and you treated him like trash." Richard sank into a chair behind the counter, his face ashen. For the first time in his life, his arrogance had nowhere to hide. "Where is he now?" Michael demanded. "I don't know. The car's impounded. I told him not to come back." Michael pulled out his phone again. "Then we're going to find him, and you're going to apologize, and then you're going to help me make this right, or I swear to God, Richard, I will tell everyone in this town exactly what kind of man you really are." By 6 p.m., Sarah had raised $680 from the diner crowd. Cole added $200 from his own savings. Emma organized a meeting at the elementary school, community outreach, supporting local veterans, and 30 people showed up. James sat in the back of the meeting, overwhelmed, embarrassed, grateful, and terrified all at once. He'd never asked for this, never wanted to be the center of attention. He just wanted to survive quietly, disappear into the background like he'd been doing for months. But Emma stood at the front of the room with a microphone and a projector, and she wasn't letting him disappear. "This is James Traven," she said, and his photo appeared on the screen, not the tired, broken one from Facebook, but an old military photo Sarah had found online after some digging. Him in uniform, younger, stronger, a man who looked like he could save the world. Purple Heart recipient, Bronze Star, 37 lives during his service, including Clay. Emma paused, looking at her notes, then at James with surprise. "Including a soldier named Michael Lannister." The room went silent. "Wait," someone said from the front row. "Lannister? As in?" The door burst open. Michael walked in, his brother trailing behind him, and every head turned. James looked up and froze. That face, older now, heavier but unmistakable. The kid he'd pulled from the burning Humvee, the one who'd cried in his arms and said, "I don't want to die, please. I don't want to die." "Sergeant Traven?" Michael's voice broke on the words. James stood slowly, his legs unsteady. "Private Lannister?" They stared at each other across the crowded room, 15 years and 1,000 lifetimes between them. Then Michael crossed the distance in 4 long strides and pulled James into a hug so tight it hurt. "You're alive. Oh my God, you're alive." James stood rigid for a moment, shock rendering him motionless. Then slowly, carefully, his arms came up and hugged Michael back, and the dam he'd been holding inside for months and years finally broke. The room erupted. Someone started clapping. Then everyone was clapping, some crying, phones out recording this impossible, beautiful reunion. Richard Lannister stood in the doorway watching the man he'd tormented embrace his brother like a long-lost father, and the shame on his face was so thick you could choke on it. Sarah caught Emma's eye across the room. Cole was grinning, his arms crossed, nodding slowly like he'd just watched justice get served on a silver platter. But this wasn't justice yet. This was just the beginning. Because when the local news got word that a homeless veteran had been secretly living in a parking lot and that he'd once saved the life of a local resident, they descended on the story like sharks in blood. By 9 p.m., 3 news vans were parked outside Morrison's diner. By 10 p.m., James's story was trending statewide. And by midnight, someone had dug up Richard Lannister's public Facebook posts, the ones where he'd complained about lazy homeless bums and parasites draining our town. The internet, as it tends to do, erupted in righteous fury. Richard's grocery store phone started ringing off the hook. Angry calls, threats of boycotts, people demanding he resign from the Chamber of Commerce, the Rotary Club, every position of respect he'd built his identity around. And in a hotel room paid for by Michael because James's car was still an impound and he had nowhere else to go, James sat on the edge of a real bed for the first time in months and tried to process what had just happened. His phone buzzed, a number he didn't recognize. He answered carefully. "Hello? Mr. Traven? This is Patricia Moss from CNN. We'd love to interview you about your story. Would you be available tomorrow?" James looked at Michael, who was sitting across from him, looking like he was afraid James might disappear if he blinked. "I don't know. We'll pay for your time, of course, and we'd like to help. There are resources for veterans, programs that can." "Can I think about it?" "Of course. But Mr. Traven, your story matters. What happened to you shouldn't happen to anyone who served this country. People need to hear it." After he hung up, Michael leaned forward. "You don't have to do anything you don't want to do." James looked at this kid who wasn't a kid anymore, who'd lived a whole life because James had refused to leave him behind. "You have a family now? Wife, 2 kids, a daughter who just started kindergarten, and a son who's obsessed with dinosaurs." Michael smiled, but it was edged with guilt. "I got to have all of that because of you, and I didn't even know you were. I should have looked for you. I should have. You were a kid, you went home, you lived your life. That's what you were supposed to do." "And what were you supposed to do? End up homeless while people like my brother?" Michael's voice turned sharp with anger. "He's going to make this right, I swear to you." But James wasn't thinking about Richard anymore. He was thinking about Sarah, Cole, and Emma, 3 strangers who'd seen him when everyone else looked away. "I want to do the interview," James said quietly. "Not for me, for them. The people who helped me. They deserve to know that kindness still matters." Michael nodded. "Then we'll do it together." What neither of them knew was that the interview would spark something far bigger than either of them imagined. And that by the end of the week, James Traven's name would be known across the entire country. But first, there was one more person who needed to face what he'd done. And tomorrow morning, Richard Lannister was going to learn that cruelty always comes with a price. The CNN interview aired at 6 p.m. the next evening, and by 7 p.m., Richard Lannister's world was on fire. His store's Yelp page crashed from the volume of 1-star reviews. The Chamber of Commerce asked him to step down. His biggest suppliers started calling, threatening to pull contracts. Someone spray-painted "veteran hater" across his storefront during the night. But Richard's public apology video, awkward, scripted, clearly lawyer-approved, made everything worse. "I made an error in judgment," he read from his phone, stiff and unconvincing. "I didn't know the full story." The comments were merciless. "You didn't want to know. Error in judgment? You called a war hero garbage. Too little, too late, Lannister." By Friday morning, Richard had lost 40% of his business. His wife had taken their kids to her mother's house. His own brother wouldn't return his calls. But for James, the attention was suffocating. Donations poured in $47,000 in 3 days. News trucks followed him everywhere. Strangers recognized him at the diner, wanting photos, asking invasive questions about his service, his homelessness, his trauma. Everyone wanted a piece of his pain, packaged as inspiration. "I can't do this," he told Sarah on Saturday morning, his hands shaking around his coffee cup. "I'm not a hero. I'm just a guy who couldn't keep his life together." "That's not true." "It is." His voice cracked. "You know what the worst part is? Everyone's treating me like I'm special now, but I'm the same person I was last week when I was sleeping in my car. Nothing about me changed, just what they know about me. The panic attacks came back that night, full force. James woke up gasping in his hotel room, convinced he was back in the Humvee, flames everywhere, screams echoing. Michael found him on the floor at 3 a.m., sobbing, unreachable. I can't be what they want me to be. James whispered when he finally came back to himself. I can't be their feel-good story. I'm too broken. And for the first time since their reunion, Michael didn't have an answer. Because the truth was simple and terrible. The world loved a redemption story, but it didn't know what to do with the messy, complicated reality of trauma that didn't heal on a convenient timeline. James had saved lives, but who was going to save him? Sarah found James sitting in his car, the one they'd finally gotten out of impound at dawn on Sunday morning. He wasn't sleeping, just staring through the windshield at nothing. She tapped on the window. He looked over, exhausted, and unlocked the door. You can't keep running from this, she said, sliding into the passenger seat. Watch me, James. Her voice was firm but gentle. I know this is overwhelming. I know you didn't ask for any of it, but there are people out there, veterans just like you, who need to see that it's possible to come back from this, that they're not alone. I don't want to be a poster boy for PTSD and homelessness. Then don't be. Be yourself. Be honest. Tell the truth, the ugly parts, the parts that don't tie up neatly, because that's what people actually need to hear. James rubbed his face with both hands. What if I can't? Then we'll be right there with you. Sarah pulled out her phone and showed him a text chain with her, Cole, Emma, and Michael. You're not doing this alone anymore. Whether you like it or not, you've got a team now. Something shifted in James's expression. Not hope exactly, but something close to it. The faint recognition that maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to carry everything by himself anymore. There's a veterans outreach program, Emma said when they all met at the diner an hour later. They want you to speak, share your story. Not the sanitized version, the real one, about what it's like coming home, about how the system fails people, about what actually helps. James looked around the table at these three strangers who'd become his lifeline, at Michael, who carried his own survivor's guilt, at the community that had rallied when it mattered most. Okay, he said quietly. I'll do it, but on my terms. I tell the truth. All of it. Cole grinned. We wouldn't want it any other way. The outreach event was scheduled for Wednesday evening at the community center, but on Tuesday afternoon, something unexpected happened. A man walked into Morrison's diner, late 50s, weathered face, veteran's cap. He approached James's table where he sat with Sarah. Sergeant Traven? James looked up, not recognizing him. I'm David Chen. You pulled me out of a vehicle in Kandahar, 2009. James's breath caught. Corporal Chen? Captain Chen now, retired. David's eyes were wet. I saw your interview. I've been looking for you for 15 years. I wanted to thank you. Tell you that I got to meet my daughter because of you. She just graduated college last month. James stood on shaky legs, and they embraced like brothers reunited after war. And that's when James realized something crucial. His story wasn't just about him. It was about every life he'd touched, every person who'd made it home, every family that stayed whole because of split-second decisions made in hell. Maybe he was broken. Maybe he'd never be the man he was before. But he still mattered. By Wednesday evening, the community center was packed. 200 people showed up, veterans, families, Sarah, Cole, Emma, Michael, and dozens of others who donated, shared the story, and believed that one man's dignity was worth fighting for. James stood at the microphone, hands trembling, notes he'd written crumpled in his pocket. I don't have a speech prepared, he started, his voice rough. Because the truth is, I don't know how to make sense of the last few months, or the last 15 years. I saved lives in the military, and I'm proud of that. But when I came home, I couldn't save myself. The room was silent. I want to tell you it gets better, that there's some magic moment where everything clicks and you're healed and whole again. But that's not true. Some days I can barely breathe. Some nights I can't sleep. And for months, I lived in my car because I didn't know where else to go. He looked at Sarah, Cole, and Emma in the front row. But three strangers saw me not as a story or a charity case, just as a person who needed help, and they didn't wait for permission. They didn't wait for me to ask. They just showed up. His voice cracked. That's what saved me. Not the donations, not the attention, just 3 people who refused to look away. Before we go any further, and trust me, you need to hear what happens next. I want to ask you something. Are you that person? The one who sees people others ignore? Drop a comment below and tell me about a time you helped someone or someone helped you. And if these stories move you like they move me, hit that subscribe button. Because this channel, it's about reminding us all that we're not alone, that compassion still exists, that one person can make a difference. Now back to James, because what happened next changed everything. I'm not going to stand here and tell you I'm fixed, James continued. I'm not. But I'm standing here, and that's something. If you're a veteran struggling right now, if you're homeless, if you're one bad day away from giving up, I see you. We see you. And there are people who want to help. Let them. The applause started slowly, then built like a wave. People were crying, veterans in the crowd, families who'd lost someone, people who'd never served but understood that this mattered. And in the back of the room, Richard Lannister stood watching, his face a mask of shame and something that almost looked like understanding. After the speech, he approached James slowly, hesitantly. I don't expect forgiveness, Richard said quietly. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that I've donated $50,000 to the Veterans Outreach Program in your name, and I'm selling the store, using the money to fund housing for homeless veterans in this county. James stared at him. Why? Because Michael's right. Because you're right. Because I've spent my whole life thinking success meant money and power, and it took losing everything to realize I've never actually done anything that mattered. Richard's voice was thick. You saved my brother's life, and I treated you like garbage. I'll spend the rest of mine trying to make that right. James didn't respond immediately. Forgiveness wasn't something he could just hand out. Not after everything. But he nodded. Once an acknowledgement, a beginning. Maybe that was enough. The following week, everything accelerated. A national veterans organization reached out and they wanted James to join their board, help redesign their outreach programs based on what actually worked. Real input from someone who'd lived it. A local construction company offered him a job. Not charity. A real position managing their veteran hiring initiative. $45,000 a year with benefits. The mayor organized a formal ceremony in the town square. 200 veterans showed up in uniform. The local VA office, the same one that had lost James's paperwork for years, suddenly found his disability claim. Approved. Backdated. But the moment that broke James came on a quiet Thursday afternoon. Sarah, Cole, Emma, and Michael led him to a house on Maple Street. Small, blue shutters, a porch swing that creaked in the wind. What is this? James asked. Emma handed him a key. It's yours. Paid off. The donations, the fundraiser, some anonymous contributions. She glanced at Richard, who stood awkwardly at the edge of the group. It's yours, forever. James stood frozen, key in his shaking hand, staring at a home. His home. I don't... His voice failed. You don't have to say anything, Cole said. Just accept it. You've earned this 1,000 times over. James walked up the steps, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. Furnished. Stocked kitchen. Photos on the wall of him in uniform, him with his unit, memories he'd tried to forget because they hurt too much. He turned to find all of them standing in the doorway of his unlikely family, these people who'd refused to let him disappear. Thank you, he whispered, for seeing me. Michael stepped forward. No, thank you for saving my life, for showing me what real courage looks like. That Saturday, the town held a celebration. Not for James, he'd made them promise. No more spotlights, but for the new Veterans Support Center opening downtown. Funded by Richard's store sale, run by the outreach program, designed to ensure no veteran ever slipped through the cracks again. James stood in the back watching, finally able to breathe. Richard approached one last time. I'm leaving town, starting over somewhere I can actually do some good. But I wanted you to know you changed me. You changed this whole town. James nodded. Good luck. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was released, and sometimes that's all you can offer. As the sun set on that Saturday evening, James sat on his porch swing with Sarah, Cole, Emma, and Michael around him, and for the first time in 15 years he felt something he'd thought was gone forever. Peace, not the absence of pain, but the presence of people who made the pain bearable. And that, he realized, was everything. 6 months later, James Traven stood in front of 23 veterans at the new support center, teaching a workshop on resilience and reintegration. He didn't sugarcoat it, didn't pretend the hard days had disappeared, but he showed them something more valuable than false hope, proof that rock bottom wasn't the end of the story. His house had become a gathering place. Sunday dinners with Sarah, Cole, Emma, and Michael's family. A spare room for veterans in crisis who needed a safe place to land. The porch swing where he'd spent countless evenings reading, healing, remembering that stillness wasn't the same as giving up. The job was good, purposeful. He helped other veterans navigate the system that had failed him, made sure their paperwork didn't get lost, their voices didn't go unheard. David Chen visited twice, brought his daughter to meet the man who'd made her existence possible. They shared stories, scars, and survival. And Richard? He'd moved to Oregon, working with a homeless advocacy nonprofit. He sent James an email every few months on updates and apologies that were starting to feel less like obligation and more like genuine remorse. James didn't always respond, but he read them. One evening, as autumn painted the trees gold and red, Emma found James on his porch. "You good?" she asked, settling into the chair beside him. "Yeah," he said. And for the first time, he meant it. "I'm good." "You saved a lot of lives over there," she said quietly, "but I think you've saved even more here, just by showing people that broken doesn't mean finished." James smiled, the kind that reached his eyes. "I didn't do it alone." "No," she agreed. "You didn't. None of us do." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of hope. James thought about the car he'd lived in, now donated to another veteran who needed transportation, about the parking lot where he'd hit his lowest point, about 3 strangers who'd refused to let him disappear. He thought about the 37 lives he'd saved in combat and the countless others he was helping now. But mostly, he thought about this, that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do isn't charging into battle. It's accepting help, letting people in, choosing to keep breathing when everything says to stop. The dog tags still hung around his neck, heavier some days than others, but now they shared space with a house key, a work badge, and the knowledge that he wasn't just surviving anymore. He was living, and that made all the difference. So here's my question for you. Wherever you are right now, who in your life needs to be seen? Who's fighting a battle nobody knows about? Drop a comment below, share this story, and if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel, because every week we share stories that remind us why compassion matters, why kindness changes everything, and why no one should ever have to fight alone. James Traven went from living in his car to rebuilding his life, not because of a miracle, but because 3 people refused to look away. Be those people. See the invisible. Help the forgotten. Because sometimes saving someone's life doesn't require a battlefield. Sometimes it just requires showing up.